Uh, Thanks very much, Frank. My name is Alex Towers. I'm Director of Policy and Public Affairs for BT Group. And BT, some of you will know, is the UK's oldest, largest telecommunications company. And we serve over 800 large multinational customers across all sorts of sectors, including insurance companies and stretching across the globe. So we see enormous potential in AI across lots of industries, and we use it a lot ourselves. Actually, in our own work, we are the UK's. We've registered more AI patents than any other UK organisation. But at the same time, one of the reasons I was keen to do this sort of session today, I think we can see amongst our customers increasing amounts of anxiety, unease about some of the aspects of new technology, including AI, but also including all manner of other things, from online harms through to the standards around how we keep and use data. People see huge benefits from all the technology they're now using every day, but they're also starting to worry a little bit about that. And we've got a mission that is all about, we say we connect for good, which is great in theory, but how do we turn that into practice and start to think through a little bit more what responsible technology actually looks like. And I think to your point earlier, Frank, trying to put the consumer and the customer in the middle of that and think about how they are informed and can start to make choices and understand what the technology is doing is one important principle of that. So the concept of good AI is really important, I think. I will talk a bit less probably about specifically the insurance industry, but I think some of the things I can say about how we see the technology developing and the risks and the benefits and the policy issues do apply absolutely to that sector as well. The first thing I would just say is, I suppose, obvious thing for any telco to say is there are really important enablers that we need to make any of this technology work really, really well. So we won't get the benefits from AI everywhere across society if we don't have the investment, both public and private, in connectivity, and that's networks, obviously universal high-speed networks, but also compute power and cloud storage and cyber security and data quality and sort of protections around privacy and as you said, your sort of investment in skills and education. All these things kind of fit together. They shouldn't be thought of in separate kind of categories. Having said all that, I think specifically on AI, I mean, the benefits we see in our business, I think, do have parallels with the insurance industry. So, I mean, the first of them is about operational efficiency. So at BT, for example, we use AI to help deploy field engineers to get them in the right places at the right times, to monitor how the network is performing, to use our staff to understand the data about what even things like the weather and traffic are happening, to make sure we get the right person to the right place at the right time. And that is worth millions of pounds a year, and that kind of applies in almost any large company, I think. Second is about innovation, and in particular in our business, we are increasingly using AI on sort of cyber security to help to predict and detect where attacks are going. We get thousands of attacks on the network every single day from all sorts of malign actors and criminals, and we are increasingly patenting sort of machine learning and advanced data visualization sort of services that allow our analysts to identify where the threats are coming from and sort of pick out patterns amongst the many billions of kind of things that are happening that could be relevant. Very, very helpful to make sense of those sort of complicated scenarios, and then we can use that to help protect governments and also businesses across the world. And that sort of context where you are trying to identify and map risk in a complicated sort of setting is clearly relevant, I would say, to the insurance industry in a different sort of sense. The third is just about meeting customers' sort of basic needs, expectations in a clever way. So one very simple thing we do is a call protect phone line service, which basically helps customers to screen out the kind of illegal robo-call kind of stuff that they get, and which obviously are largely targeted at more vulnerable people, and that sort of capacity to target and tailor a service to the individual customer is fantastic. And equally, I think all the things I've just mentioned are really probably only at the start of what AI can achieve. So it's the right time to be thinking about when things get much more complicated and we get into, as you were saying, Frank, sort of algorithm to algorithm kind of stuff, then what are the sort of protections you need in place? Because we're not quite there yet, but it's the right time to think about it. And the categories of risk that you set out, I think we totally agree with privacy in particular, and data, and that is an issue for us as well as it would be for insurance companies. Sort of complacency about just sort of putting this in a box called AI and leaving it to technical people and not understanding the implications, certainly. And the reverse of that, which is engineers themselves not having the sort of ethical awareness or training or standards that they might need. The more tricky question, I suppose, is what do you do about those risks? A lot of them are about kind of ethics and human rights, I suppose, and the sort of high-level principles, the sort of things in the Commission's 7 key requirements that all absolutely make sense. And in BT ourselves, we are introducing new training programs and governance systems to try to sort of identify the principles and make sure people have thought them through. And I guess any large company, probably to your point earlier about sort of how you avoid kind of cultural risk, should be trying to do that and making sure that the senior management are thinking these things through and aware of the risks. The difficult bit, which I don't think anyone's really sort of solved yet, is how you turn principles into sort of clear patterns of action and behaviour and fail-safes, and that really is where I think we're just sort of more at the start of the process. And increasingly, it will just be really important for different sectors, I think, in large institutions to share best practice and tell each other what they're doing, so we can all learn. And I think it's totally right that the emphasis needs to be on where the human agency goes in the system and what sort of oversight is needed where, especially if there are important decisions that are going to affect people's lives, hiring and firing and assessing of credit worthiness. These are really kind of crucial things. You can't leave entirely to a computer system. The human element needs to be in there somewhere. I guess the only sort of observation on that I would have is there is another point often not mentioned, which is that the AI systems can also correct the human capacity for error and bias, because we are obviously not perfect and capable of all sorts of unconscious and conscious prejudices. So combining the two, probably in the right way, is the sort of the right objective to have. I just want to use a couple of minutes just at the end to just talk about the policy sort of setting, slightly broader sense of this. I mean, we are very keen, I think, like lots of companies in our sector, to see the maximum amount of regulatory and legal coherence really around this sort of area. So there's an EU version of that, certainly, to try to tie together the different legal instruments, whether it's GDPR and consumer agenda, cybersecurity, the new data strategy. Really important to try and make sure those are complementary and not sort of in conflict. There's a UK version of this as well, where we have a sort of now quite a plethora of bodies and institutions. We've got an AI Council, an Office for AI, a Centre for Data Ethics, the Information Commissioner's Office, which is a sort of regulator, a whole manner of different government initiatives on the go, ethics frameworks and cybersecurity strategies and digital strategies. All of these are really important, but a little bit more sort of clarity of exactly how they fit together is going to be crucial in order for, as we were saying a second ago, for people to understand any of this stuff and who's doing what and how it all fits together. We're quite optimistic in the UK that there's a new national data strategy, which could be one way of doing that. And we absolutely welcome the EU data strategy and the proposals there on governance as one way of trying to take a holistic approach and thinking about things like standardization and interoperability and the sorts of governance structures that you need. And in general, we are very keen to support open data ecosystems. And I think there is more that increasingly government and industries can do to work together on some of this and to try to develop those sort of common standards about how data is managed and exchanged. And if we don't do that, then the effective functioning of all the new technologies on the horizon and smart systems, smart cities, smart healthcare, autonomous vehicles, drone fleets, none of these things will work effectively if there isn't a sort of focus on what horizontal standards and cooperation look like. And maybe Gaia X in the European context is one example of how that could be developed. And then the final, more immediate thing from the UK perspective, underpinning any of this, to sort of keep data moving effectively across Europe, would be to try to get as speedy as possible a resolution of the data adequacy finding that we would really like the EU to give the UK. I mean, I completely appreciate that's not in anyone's gift right at the minute because it's all tied up in arguments about fishing quotas and all the rest of it. But I would really hope by the time we get to this point next year, that sort of underpinning regulatory standard could have been put in place.
Right, that's great, Alex. Thank you very much. And our next speaker is Maria Manuel.